Okay, this week we are talking about destroying demons, sort of. Actually, what we're really going to talk about is how compassion matters. But of course, if I made a video entitled How Compassion Matters, it might not get a lot of views. It's not very click worthy, right? But this video is inspired by somebody who put a comment on the Patreon site. And it was in the general chat, and this person was asking, how, what do you guys think? Shouldn't I just destroy the demons instead of feeling compassion for them or empathizing with them or trying to make meaning out of them? Um, and I saw the comment. I don't think I responded to it. I'm not sure. Um, it reminded me of somebody saying, guys, I think I'm going to start cutting myself on a regular basis. That's how it struck me first. It's a bit harsh of an, the interpretation is a bit harsh, but it kind of struck me that way. But mainly for people on a spiritual path, when if you were to ask, oh, I'm going to start destroying people, that's okay, right? And on a spiritual path, it's like, well, if you do that, you're kind of hurting yourself, because in other words, there's this whole transpersonal realm thing going on. Anyway, um, so the thing about spiritual traditions, and I was in the bookstore today, and I know how frustrating it is when you want to learn some spiritual tricks, some disciplines for achieving enlightenment practices. And you can tell that my Patreon site is largely about just delivering the enlightenment practices, not trying to turn you into a good citizen or make you well behaved or make you into a vegetarian who doesn't hurt any animals, or it's not about being a good person necessarily. And yet when you go to, especially if I were to go to the Eastern mysticism section in the bookstore, I usually check out the Buddhism and the Advaita Vedanta stuff as much as I can when I go to the bookstore. And if you go there, what you'll notice is most of what you see is about how to be a good person, especially if it's by the Dalai Lama. There is some stuff the Dalai Lama wrote when he was younger that is more esoteric and more about the enlightenment practices. But most of the stuff he writes for the general population is really more about how to be a good person and how to be compassionate, which is really quite aggravating because it's um, it's not really getting into the hardcore enlightenment practices necessarily, right? Well, so what I want to talk about today is how compassion becomes part of the enlightenment practices, why it is important, okay, how it is important in the enlightenment practices. That way you can, I'm not trying to turn you into a good person to make you care about others and all this kind of stuff, okay? However, if you are making progress in the work, that's going to start happening in radical ways. You will become a better person, but in ways that you can't possibly even fathom at this point, most likely. Radically good person, and which can actually get you into trouble. Okay, so because what you think is good now is not necessarily what you're going to think is good after you've been through some radical spiritual transformation that this kind of work does. Specifically, I'm speaking about the kind of work done in the Kabbalah Magic Book. That's a book of enlightenment practices. That's a specific discipline. And on the Patreon site, I put other types of disciplines that are not part of the Kabbalah Magic Book that people could also do on a daily basis as part of their efforts to transform themselves into an enlightened being. Okay, that's a problematic statement, by the way, but I wonder if you guys could tell me why you think that's problematic. So the question is, shouldn't I just destroy the demon? I just shoot a ray of light at it and kill it, right? And because love destroys all evil, or the light of God will actually destroy anything that's truly evil. or something like that, right? That's a nice romantic notion. Uh, so we're going to talk about why or how compassion matters when you are doing the great work. Okay, specifically when you are facing aspects of yourself. I put yourself in quotes because the conventional yourself does not exist, um, not ultimately anyway. And so, in the Golden Dawn magic system, this is the system that is presented in the Kabbalah magic book. Um, Eventually, the magician will be hardcore conjuring forth demons. Okay. In the outer order process, which is mostly what the Kabbalah magic work is about, you don't directly do that. Okay. Because the practice of performing the banishings and the middle pillar automatically prods demons to appear. Okay. That is if you're doing it correctly. So, in other words, things will get more difficult in your life, sort of, uh, if you start to do the banishing rituals and the middle pillar every day. Okay. Um, the reason that things get more difficult and that banishing actually conjures up demons. There is a video I released called "The True Purpose of the LBRP." Might want to check that out so you can figure out what's he talking about. If I'm banishing demons, don't they go away? Don't I just destroy them? Okay, well, in the when you're a magician and you're conjuring forth, demons in a hardcore sort of way, once you know what you're doing, there might be a point in the ceremony where you say to all the spirits present, "Depart in peace to your abodes and habitations, and go with the blessings of so and so." Right? Um, that's basically telling them to dissolve. That's basically destroying them right there. Okay, so when the spirits go back to their abodes and habitations, that means they're going to just kind of disappear back into the ether, into unmanifestation, as far as you're concerned, right? And we make it as a quaint way of saying dissolve back into the ether, back into your abode and habitations, which is um, the anima or the soul of the world. Okay, I said anima, not enema. Okay, so the anima is the soul of the world, the anima mundi. The demons dissolve back into that, which is essentially the imagination. They dissolve back into imagination. And remember, imagination is not something that's in your head. Imagination is everywhere. You are immersed in imagination. Okay, and so when you're working with these various entities, they come forth out of the imagination. Whoa. Okay, and then we could try to tell them to go away right away, to banish them. I banish thee to hell, like in the name of Jesus and things like that, right? That's not a good idea. Okay, or I utterly destroy thee, with the light of God or lightning or something like that, right? Not a good idea. Okay, because the demons will, you can do that. You can destroy them, but that's called repression. You can repress them. Okay, these are entities in the collective unconscious, by the way. They're not just your demons. They're shared by all of us, even by all mammals, and even by lower life forms, some of them anyway. Lower life forms. Um, so this idea of when you're done working with them, yes, then they can dissolve back into the ether, okay? But the idea is to conjure them forth and to do some kind of activity with them. And that activity involves empathy, compassion, okay? But of course, after that work is done, then they can dissolve back into the ether. And you can say, "Depart in peace to your abodes and habitations, and go with the blessings of the great name of strength through sacrifice." If you simply destroy them with divine light, you can do that in the imagination, right? Uh, they will reconstitute. They will come back. So if there are things that are bothering you, triggering you during the day, they're annoying you, making you act like an ass on occasion, and you want them to stop doing that, destroying them and repressing them makes them worse. Okay. A good example of that is basically somebody suffering from PTSD. If you have PTSD, the hallucinations of a traumatic event come back very vividly sometimes, and they haunt you. And it's kind of their way of coming up and saying, hey, you need to do something about this horrible event that we've experienced here and make some kind of meaning out of it. Okay, make sense of this thing that's happened to us. And if you don't do that with your executive function, whatever it is you have as a human being, right, then I'm going to keep bothering you. And if you repress me and try to make me go away, I'm going to get worse. And veterans who suffer from PTSD, guess what they do? Or police officers who suffer from PTSD. One of their number one habits is alcoholism, because alcohol is a great way to destroy the demons or to make yourself numb to them. In which case they basically just depart in peace to their abodes and habitations, but they go away unsatisfied because you are not dealing with them. Okay, and then they're going to come back with a vengeance, and that's what happens. And lo and behold, when you try to help somebody overcome PTSD, you they have to deliberately call up the traumatic experience and make some kind of meaning from it by writing in their journal. And okay, and the way to do that is through empathy. Okay, and this is a very, very far-reaching ability that we have. So I'll give you an example of that. If you conjure up if you have a fear of heights and you conjure up a scenario of hanging off of a precipice or like teetering on the edge of a precipice, okay, that yawning chasm can be sort of like a demon that's triggering you. The trigger is the demon, like, so that it's the abyss, right? The yawning mouth of the abyss, mouth of hell, and you're going to fall into that, right? Well, that's an interesting demon, sure, but of course the real demon, remember, is the entity that is attempting to arise as you, the entity that is afraid of falling in. So you turn the light around and look at this thing that's attempting to arise as you. Okay, now this entity requires you to display empathy. Okay, it's very simple. If you think in terms of evolutionary psychology, it's like I have this fear entity that attempts to arise in me and take me over and make me cringe and pull back from the precipice or something like that, right? And when you empathize with it, you basically are like speculating and like, oh, I think I know how you evolved to be as you are. You're just trying to protect us. You're like a mechanism. You're like a protective mechanism, a shrinking away from the precipice mechanism, right? Yeah, there are mainly two types of demons: fear demons and desire demons. Okay, and this is obviously a fear demon, or it's a cringe demon, right? Other demons are like I have to go grab that. Okay, that's another type. Both essentially the same. Desire demons are manifestations of evolutionary trauma that involve deprivation, starvation, okay, or I'm not good enough, or whatever. I need something. I need a want. I'm so hungry, like, or something like that, right? And fear demons are cringe demons, like or flee demons, or even fight demons, right? They want you to do something, and then of course, when they start to flare up, the empathy that you exert is not towards the thing that triggered you, but it's toward the thing that's attempting to arise as you. It's like, what do you want me to do? You want me to fight? But I'm not in danger. Oh, but this looks like a threatening situation to you. And you want me to react in a physical sort of way. I understand. Okay. So So whenever these things are conjured up, whenever they pop up, um, it's not the external triggered demon that you need to look at. It's the internal demon that's attempting to arise as you. You're involuntarily invoking something every time you react unconsciously. This is called invocation. Invocation is not that complicated because it happens all the time, all through the day. Every time you react unconsciously, you are being taken over by something, which is invocation. Okay. And of course, an enlightened being, supposedly, is someone who is aware of all entities as they arise to attempt to take him over. And an enlightened being can simply say, no, I'm not going to let you. But in order to do that, they have to have compassion. They have to understand how these entities arise, and they have to become spacious enough to allow them to rise and to speak. It's not about repressing them when they say no. It's simply about acknowledging that they're there and simply saying, I'm not going to react. And so the response of an enlightened being to a demon is, thank you for sharing your concerns. Okay, and I can see how you have evolved to be this sort of cringy mechanism that you are, and I can see what you're trying to do for us. But this situation does not call for that kind of action. Okay, and of course, then you can start working with that demon or spirit in an empathetic way to see if you can mature it. In other words, or refine it, cultivate it to change how it serves you. And lo and behold, you have a familiar spirit when that happens. Okay, but in order to do that, it requires empathy. I would say real empathy too, not cognitive empathy, which maybe we'll talk about in a bit. So when we do demon summoning, we are actually taking advantage of a sort of pathological mechanism that arises in human beings. It's actually a controlled form of hallucination. And I'm going to give you an example of this. In Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Telltale Heart, there is the protagonist, the main character, the narrator, is a psychopath. It's a murderer. And when you read the story, it's written from the first person point of view. It's the psychopath himself who's talking, and he commits a murder during the story, and he describes the murder in not very gruesome detail. And it becomes obvious to the reader that this person has no compassion, and that really, for 3 or 4 of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, the most horrifying part is not to be the victim of the murder, it is to be the killer. In other words, to understand that there really are people in the world who do not feel empathy. Okay, empathy at all. A pure psychopath supposedly doesn't exist, but knowing somebody who is a psychopath or sociopath, it becomes clear. It's like, this person doesn't feel anything. Like, in other words, and they can kind of do anything to you, and it won't faze them. It doesn't even concern them. So anyway, this narrator in the story, Poe, I think in my mind, he tries to show us what's wrong with the psychopath. Okay, I think Poe might have known a few psychopaths in his life, and he was really trying to figure out, how can people possibly be this way? And so during the story, after he's murdered this old man, the narrator has murdered an old man, a neighbor heard the scream, and some cops come over. But before the cops come over, he did have a chance to dismember the body and then put it underneath the floorboards of the place where he lives, right? And then put back the floorboards so carefully that nobody can really tell anything's wrong. So he's going to get away with the murder. So a couple of cops come in and say, "Oh, the neighbor overheard a scream. Is everything okay here?" And sure, sure, everything's fine. And he even invites them in, and is very polite with them, as you know, charming as psychopaths can be. And they happily sit down and start chatting with him and just having a good time. And during the conversation, he begins to hear something. He begins to hallucinate. He begins to hear the heartbeat of his victim, and that sound of that heartbeat is coming through the floorboards. Okay, and so he gets kind of nervous at that, and you think, oh, the police officers are going to hear that heart, and they're going to know that the body's down there. And so he starts talking louder and starting arguments to try and distract them from the sound of this beating heart underneath the floorboards. Okay, they can't hear it, of course, it's a hallucination. um, and the sound of the heartbeat gets louder and louder and louder until finally he just rips up the floorboards and says, "Here, I've killed this man. Here's the body. Arrest me. Take me away." So what this is showing is that the the empathy of this psychopath was still intact. In other words, that part of his brain was still functioning. But there was something wrong with the brain, let's say, a little wrong with the mind. So the empathy was, yeah, yelling, but nobody could hear. It was kind of like locked up in its own little area, and there was no way of, like, I don't know, the conscience or whatever there of or the consciousness of feeling the pain for the victim. Okay, so in order for the empathy to still function, it starts to get desperate and create an externalized hallucination of that sound of the beating heart. And of course, the heart represents compassion, right? Um, which is the faculty that the killer supposedly lacks. But apparently, he doesn't lack it. He's got it. It just can't get through to him. The only way it can get through to him is through an externalized hallucination. So you can see that when you're conjuring demons deliberately and then allowing them to take form, okay, or even giving them a form in your imagination, the form you think they might take, even allowing them to tell you their name, or perhaps giving them a name that you think they might have. As you do that, you are exercising that empathy ability very much the way that the empathy factor in itself would try to get through to you. Okay, so you're using the pathological hallucination of a madman, but you're doing it deliberately and consciously to take advantage of this mechanism that's at work. Okay, this is kind of, yeah, magic is a bit crazy, right? And remember, magic tends to attract unbalanced people. And of course, we were all of us unbalanced at one point as we came to this work, right? And supposedly we became more balanced. But and of course, it attracts them probably because it's a way of acting out pathologies and taking control of the hallucinations, which eventually would, like, probably start to come after them, and if they didn't deal with them, if they keep repressing them, right? Anyway, so you can see that the way that insane people try to get better by acting out, by hallucinating, you can see there's a mechanism there that's at work. Now, that mechanism is being forced upon them, and they don't know what to do with it. So it's not really working for them yet. But of course, the therapist or psychologist comes along and then helps them process these horrible events or whatever it is that's trying to get their attention, right? Um, if our faculties of empathy are weak, we can practice them through the types of external visualization practices and basically magic. Okay, and that's primarily why we do the banishing rituals. And of course, eventually, when you do the banishing rituals every day, the triggers that upset you in your environment will get stronger, and you'll be able to recognize them happening. And on the pages of your journal, you'll be able to write about them. okay, and then make meaning out of them. But of course, the best thing you can do is, to the best of your ability, empathize with them, speculate how these how the feeling that's attempting to arise in you, how it has evolved to compulsively do that. What's it trying to do? How does it feel? What does it think it wants? What does it really need? Okay, and this is the process. Okay, and that's why a lot of times on in the Patreon site, I often get people to try to turn the light around, look at the entity that's attempting to arise as you. Stop focusing on all the triggers out there that are bothering you. That it's okay to focus on them, but every time you see, every time a demon rises outside your magic circle to trigger you, you can thank it for that. But you turn the light around and look at the entity that's attempting to arise as you, and then empathize with that, because it's not you. Whatever this mechanism that is attempting to take you over and make you unconscious for a moment, to react unconsciously, what is it? And of course, then you can use your literary skill or your poetic skill or your mythic skill to give it form. How does it move? How does it feel? What does it think it wants? What does it truly need? What's its name? Things like that. And these things, if you're in the outer order process, you can simply write about them in your journal. Okay, you wouldn't work with your demons. You wouldn't go after an externalized hallucination unless you are much further along as an adept. At least that's the structure of the grade work anyway. I think a lot of you are just going full tilt into demon summoning, and that might not be a problem. Of course, it could be. And another reason why I'm doing this video is because there is something happening in the world lately, and it seems to be sort of a pandemic, and it probably has to do with damage to the gut, damage to the intestines. I know this is kind of strange, but as children develop, if their gut and their intestines are not in good shape, then the brain might not fully develop either, or it might end up being slightly damaged. That's my guess. Okay, and then we get something called autism, which is definitely on the rise. Okay, and it seems to be a gut-related condition. And if the gut integrity is being damaged during the development of the brain, I think that's how autism develops. Okay, if the gut gets damaged when you already have a fully developed brain, apparently you can't become autistic anymore. I don't know, or can you? I'm not sure. It seems to be something that comes because of the development of the brain during childhood. Anyway, and then people end up autistic as adults and have diminished ability to be aware of emotions. In other words, the empathy is diminished. This would be a problem in magical work, okay, because empathy, you can see why it's required. All right, so lack of empathy. Sociopathy is one of the factors. Sociopaths are basically psychopaths, but they weren't born that way. They were conditioned into being that way. Through repeated traumas, their ability to empathize with others has simply been shut off or dismissed. Okay, so when the ability to empathize with others is being suppressed or devalued and then basically kicked aside, that is sociopathy. There's all kinds of definitions about it. Psychology is very wishy-washy, but it's helpful to see sociopathy and psychopathy as different. Okay, narcissism is also marked by a lack of empathy. Okay, so narcissists, and they tend to be very full of themselves and whatnot. And narcissism is something that can develop in the magical work if you do not engage with these demons or these entities with compassion and empathy. Okay, and that's why so many ceremonial magicians are ego inflated and assholes, and um, it, they aren't that way because the magic isn't working. They are that way because the magic is working. But unfortunately, they're becoming narcissistic or whatever that is because they are failing to engage with the demons using empathy and compassion. Um, and one of the best ways to do this is by keeping a magical journal. Okay. Preferably one that's handwritten. Okay. I did release a video about that too. But of course, you can do one that is digital recordings. Yeah. Yeah. Better to keep it handwritten. There's a good reason for that, but not going to go into that. Psychopathy. Psychopaths are born. Their brain just simply doesn't process empathy, okay, or has a very severely diminished ability to do that. Okay. Supposedly Hannibal Lecter was a pure psychopath. Um, autism. Autism is marked by alexithymia. Basically, alexithymia is the diminished ability to identify and to recognize emotions, okay? Particularly in yourself. Okay, and I have a lot of experience working with autistic learners, and yeah, they can start yelling at you sometimes, being rude to you, and they don't realize it, and they don't want to be that way either. And so, and I'll point out, do you realize you're yelling at me right now? And they're, oh, I'm so sorry. They didn't realize it, because of the alexithymia, the lack of awareness of the emotions. They can get angry and not even realize they're angry. It's very interesting, actually. But of course, when you point it out as an external manifestation, you can say, "Do you hear yourself yelling?" And they're like, "Oh, now." So in other words, then they on the when they can see it happening on the outside, or somebody tells them on the outside, then they're aware of it. But somehow that the empathy part of the brain is not quite getting through unless it's done externally. Okay, it comes through the outside instead of through the inside. And of course, being male also shuts down the ability to feel empathy. Okay, um, I question that. Okay, I think men have just as much ability as women to feel or sense emotion, but uh, there's a couple things going on there because they specialized as the fighters and the hunters. The bigger muscles, the thicker skin, and the more aggressive traits, right? It became important for them to be able to set their feelings aside to get the job done. Okay. And not only is that important apparently to a lot of men, but also it's important for them to demonstrate in front of other men how callous they can be, how they can set their feelings aside. And there's some really disturbing things that boys do when they get in groups of boys. They might even torture animals together. And of course, it's like a test. Can you hurt this animal and not cry? It's really creepy. I know that, but it's something that happens, with men and young boys. Uh, and it doesn't mean that they cannot feel empathy, but it means that there's a certain value attached to being able to suppress it. Okay, and I would even go as far as saying that that's an advantage that men tend to have. They can um, more easily than most women set aside their feelings and get the job done. Okay, that's a special ability. Okay, does it cause problems? Yeah, because if it's an ability that is unconscious, if you repress your empathy and you're not aware that you're repressing your empathy, that's a problem. Okay, but for the men out there, it's like you have an ability that's probably stronger than something that women have. Your ability to suppress your empathy is probably stronger than most women, and you can take advantage of that. Okay, so it's something useful, but the the key is to be aware of it so that it doesn't simply take you over and you constantly habitually end up dismissing your feelings or pretending they're not there. It's mainly about the awareness thing. Okay. All right. So I bring up the men thing because I was one researcher who basically commented that an autistic brain is much more male than even a man's brain tends to be. In other words, it's the shutting down of empathy is even more severe in an autistic brain. Okay. But once again, I have to say, if you have a healthy brain, the problem is that the men can habituate into dismissing their ability to sense emotions. Okay. But um, if you don't have autism or alexithymia, you can very easily recondition the brain or whatever it is to to bring that faculty back because everything's still functioning if you have a healthy nervous system. Okay, healthy nervous system, healthy astral body, healthy etheric double, whatever you want to call that. This is much more than the brain going on obviously. And I also wanted to mention humor in regards to empathy. If you, one of the ways that you can tell if you have a difficulty feeling empathy is you look at the kind of humor that you have. Okay, if your idea of humor is that it always needs to be at somebody's expense, that's not really very funny. Okay, so somebody who's like a pure psychopath, the only things that are really funny to them are things that make them feel superior to others. So pointing and laughing at somebody who falls down and is clumsy, they might think that's funny, as long as it's not happening to them, right? So I've noticed that that a lot of people, the main thing that they tend to laugh at is other people who are screwing up. They're not they can't laugh at themselves. A narcissist certainly cannot do that. Cannot laugh at themselves. Okay. That's a good indication. So in other words, if your idea of humor is always somebody else being stupid or silly or lower on the totem pole than you are, that's a good indication that you suffer from alexithymia or a lack of compassion or you have a lack of empathy. And if this is the case for you, it's like, oh, well, I want to do magic, but I have autism or I think I have alexithymia or something like that, right? What can I do? Because quite frankly, if you don't do something about it, you're going to end up like Aleister Crowley because he apparently was a narcissist, classic narcissist. And I challenge anyone out there to show me any empathy in any of his writing, any real true empathy. He gives lip service to love, but usually it gets converted right into sexual love. And most of his talk is about becoming superior, mastering your emotions and attainment and whatever. Um, so his primary failure to initiate himself, apparently, from what I can tell, stems from his narcissism and his lack of empathy. So don't want to end up like he did. His life did not end well, and he was a toxic person to be around for most of the time. Anyway, he was very abusive to all of his friends. Uh, yeah. All right. So if you want to increase empathy, okay, you can take the empathy quiz. I just did that. I found a an empathy quiz put out by Berkeley. That's a university, and I scored 15 out of 20. I didn't get them all Right. Um, it was above average. I was able to identify lots of emotions, but five of them I didn't quite get right. Oh, okay. Um, Probably comes from not being very social. I'm not very much of a party animal, so there are different ways of facial expressions that I'm not used to seeing in emotions. Okay. So you can take the empathy quiz. Okay. And I think this very same website from Berkeley University, um, Berkeley College, Berkeley University, um, they are promising to release some material um, for learning how to improve your empathy. The interesting thing is that even psychopaths, when they make an effort to feel empathy, there's evidence that the part of the brain that is normally lights up with empathy actually starts to work a little bit when even when a psychopath attempts to increase empathy. So apparently, it is possible to become more empathetic, not just cognitively. Now, I have to remember that psychopaths excel at cognitive empathy. They can recognize emotions by sight, okay? And they're very good at it, okay? Which is why they can manipulate you and things like that, right? But they don't feel them. So it's not true empathy, okay? But apparently, even if they attempt to exercise feelings that go along with the facial expressions, the empathy part of the brain does light up for them. So I don't know how much they can train themselves. I'm not really sure. Supposedly it's an incurable condition, but there is some hope there. Other things you can do to increase empathy: make your own greeting cards. Yeah, you can use software to do it, and then print them out and sign them and write things on them, and then send them to people through the regular mail. Okay, you can even do that. You can create your own greeting cards, print them out, sign them, and then not mail them. Okay, it doesn't really matter if you actually send it to the person or not. Okay, it probably would be better to give it to the person, right? But just the act itself of let's say if you want to say thank you to somebody, but they're dead, and you never did say thank you to them for something they did, you can print it. You can make that card anyway, print it out, sign it, and pretend you're going to mail it. But of course, there's no place to mail it, right? Um, Even that action right there is a way of increasing empathy and practicing empathy. Eavesdrop on conversations and imagine how the people feel. Try to identify the emotions that are happening in what you're feeling there, okay? Okay, there's another practice. This is from Tibetan Buddhism. It's called Tonglen. Whenever you are feeling bad and you want to feel better, one of the ways to do that, this is really cool, by the way, you can, let's say you feel deprived, like you don't, other people have nice things and I don't have nice things. Poor me, right? What you can do, what you can do, other than just doing the demon summoning, right? What you can do is uh, think of all the people out there in the world who feel the same, who feel that same deprivation, and feel for them, understand how they feel, and uh, and then begin to exert that compassion, or let the compassion for them come out, like that bleeding heart feeling, right? Okay, and it can make you feel better because in other words, oh, we're all in this together, and we're all suffering together. Then you can feel the calm passion. They have passion going on, you have passion going on. Passion arising together, calm passion. Okay. Also, I'm going to put a link to that empathy quiz down below in the comment box and or the whatever it is, the notes underneath the video. Okay. I'm also going to put a list of tone words. The interesting thing is that if you have a lot of different words for all kinds of different subtle emotions, and you understand what those are, when you understand what those feelings are, It really helps, because what I've noticed in working with people as a reading learning specialist, if they don't have, if people don't have a word for an emotion, it's almost as though they've never really felt it. And when you have a word for an emotion, such as what's a good one? Ambition. That's an emotion, or embarrassment, or things like, or let's see, apprehension. That's a subtle variation on emotion right there, right? Um, there are all kinds of words like that that people just don't know. When you have a word for a particular emotion, then you begin to explore that emotion. Okay, so I will also put a list of tone words. There are a lot of tone words. My goodness. And if you know them all, you become that much more aware of emotions in your life. And of course, as these various entities appear from the soul of the world, the anima mundi, as they manifest before your waking eyes, you can empathize with them in such amazing depth and diversity of feeling. Okay. Volunteer. In other words, go work at a homeless shelter so you can feel that compassion for others, something like that, right? Um, Many of us are suffering from post-pandemic isolation still. We have habituated into shutting ourselves up in our apartments. I don't understand that at all, because during the pandemic, I was outside more than ever. But anyway, if you're wondering how to get out there again and work with people and get to know people, volunteer to help, like a homeless shelter or something like that. Okay, make sure it is a type of work, volunteer work, that involves working with other people, not not making political signs or whatever like that, or anything like that. It would be best to like go work on in a food distribution line where you're actually giving food out to the homeless or something like that. Okay, and then you can feel that compassion, or you can look at other people feeling compassion and wonder why you don't feel compassion. Whatever, like you're just exploring those feelings. Of course, studying literature has there the classic works of literature get you to feel feelings that you didn't even know existed. It's hard to describe that, really. I just gave the example of the Edgar Allan Poe story, which is just one thing. Okay, one amazing type of realization about emotion happening there. Study mythology, because all of the different gods and goddesses and heroic characters and villains and victims and all these, they all have different feelings. And of course, when you study mythology in particular, it's really not very interesting unless you wonder how, why did why did Aphrodite do that? Why is she such a bitch? Oh my God, I can't believe she did that. But she cursed him. Like, why would she do that, right? Um, you try to empathize with that. It's very difficult sometimes. But you would wonder how, if you were an immortal goddess, why would you behave that way? Like, how would you have evolved as a cosmic force to be this way? It requires a tremendous amount of empathy, but it's possible. You can do method acting. That's if you're particularly brave, you can take an acting class and actually star in a play, attempt to do that. But of course, method acting is really cool because you act out. Well, you conjure an internal state. Um, Method acting really isn't acting; it's real. Okay, so if you're supposed to portray someone who has just lost a loved one, like a spouse, right? You imagine that it's really happened to you, and then you conjure up scenarios in which it's really happened, and then your emotional reaction is real. Okay, so then people would say, oh, that's acting, that's method acting, right? Not really acting, it's the real deal. Okay. uh, and just one example of that, so when you're doing the LVX signs in the lesser banishing ritual of the in the banishing ritual of the hexagram, the when you do this, the L sign for the sign of the mourning of Isis, it's not, oh, I'm feeling a swell of sadness now because I'm Isis, right? And I'm in mourning, right? No, it's more like my husband is dead. Then there's a feeling there, right? In other words, this is method acting. My husband has been murdered. This is the mourning of Isis. Okay, that's, you want that feeling there, other than, oh, I feel sadness. Yeah, whatever. You have to remember that emotions are primarily imagistic scenarios. They're not just emotions, whatever that is. But it's, we make a big mistake when we just say to, oh, I'm feeling sad. Okay. It's fine to say that, but then of course, if you really want to process that emotion, you look at the scenario that's arising in your imagination. And of course, in our language, we those scenarios are there. Something's weighing upon me. Well, what does it look like? And it's like weighing upon you, right? It looks like this, right? Like how is it pouncing on you? Like from what direction? Okay. These are the real emotions, not just I feel sad or I feel oppressed or whatever. Like, what does that mean? That's so abstract. That's kind of a way of dismissing how you feel and not really feeling it. Okay, so coming up with a word for an emotion is just the beginning, because then you dive into it and say, well, how does this emotion look? Because it's already playing itself out on a subtle level in the dream realm or in the subconscious, whatever you want to call that, right? But in our modernized state of mind, in our psychosis that we call modernity, we can suppress it. There's all kinds of psychic imagery happening all the time. Okay. And of course, as you do the magical work, you begin to notice that it's there. So emotions aren't just emotions anymore. They're actual scenarios that are playing themselves out in the astral light. Okay. And of course, as the scenarios play out, empathy is really important. Otherwise, you will become a narcissistic asshole like Aleister Crowley. I'm sure I'll get interesting comments for that one. Practice feng shui. Okay. So when you learn the principles of feng shui, let's say, and then place objects in your home, this requires a tremendous amount of empathy for anybody who's going to be navigating through that space. How do they feel as they're navigating this part of your apartment or your home, whatever like that? How do they feel when they're walking through here? How does it feel walking through there? Okay. That's how it's done. And this is basically how to sense chi. Okay. How to sense the astral light, because the astral light is a living force that moves through your home as if it's a person like you who's experiencing things. Okay. And so if you don't like that, that's fine. You'll eventually develop a sense for it as you practice magic more and more. It's inevitable. Okay. But of course, it requires empathy in order to know what it feels like to be the astral light as it's moving through a space. Where does it get stuck and frustrated, and where does it linger? Okay, where does it shrink away from? What's it attracted to, right? Of course, invoking the planets and the elements, these are things we do in the magical work, even in the outer order. Okay, even the elements themselves, you empathize with them. Okay, there's a great, in one of the enlightened practices that I give, it's called the Crossroads Ritual. You empathize with the elements as you conjure them up. Okay, you might want to look at that. So those of you who do the LBRP might want to look at that Crossroads Ritual on the Patreon site. and then see how we empathize with the elements as we envision them. Okay, because you can apply that to the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. We empathize with natural forces themselves. How has a hurricane evolved to be as it is? What does it think it wants? What does it truly need? What's it trying to do? What's this natural force trying to do? Tarot, of course. All of these images on the tarot cards, they have feelings. These are living beings. If you draw the high priestess on a Monday, she might feel like a fantastic teacher who is concealing something only to basically show you what it looks like in the contours, right? And at other times, if you draw it on a Thursday, she might be simply veiling something so you can't see it. You're not ready for this yet. So these various entities of these tarot cards have different feelings and attitudes on different days. Okay, so you have to practice empathy in order to do tarot as well. You can see how important this is in order to read tarot. And of course, journal work. Okay, so the importance of empathy is that there are aspects of yourself, let's say, or aspects of the cosmos that you're not going to be able to come to terms with unless you begin to imagine what it's like to be them. Okay, and you can do this on the pages of your journal by, you can do cognitive empathy first by like speculating about what's the emotion here, what is this thing, how's it acting, what emotion does it seem to have, right? But then of course attempt to feel it. What is it like to be that element, okay, or that particular demonic entity, let's say. um, uh, if I'm afraid of dogs, let's say, eventually I might be able to contact, oh, it's some kind of wolf spirit. Probably my ancestors were troubled by wolves, and so now I suffer from a fear of dogs, right? Or even more interesting, a fear of cats, because humans apparently at one point in our prehistory were food for gigantic saber-toothed tigers. And fear of cats is probably a remnant of that, or even being hunted and killed by lions, and fear of snakes, it's very obvious, right? Um, but remember, whenever you do the journal work, it's important to turn the light around. It's not necessarily the monster like the cat that is the demon. Fine, you can see that as a demon, but the real demon is the one that's attempting to arise as you, the one that's afraid of the cat. That's the one you need to empathize with. It's like, what is it? Because it's not you. The fear is arising and attempting to take you over and make you do something. That's not you. What is it? What is this thing that's trying to take me over? How does it feel? Oh, what is it trying to get me to do? What what does it want? Oh, and what does it truly need? And so on and so on. Okay. These are things that you would do on the pages of your journal. And you can see these are the same things that somebody who is working through PTSD would do. Same things, right? And of course, being able to do hardcore magic would be even better for them, of course, but we would probably can't convince a police officer or a vet to necessarily do that. And here's for one final note. So if you do the empathy quiz that I'm going to put in the description box below, many people, I see this in the New Age community all the time, people saying, are you an empath? I'm an empath. And that word just bothers me so much because having read a lot of sci-fi, an empath is somebody with the psychic ability to detect emotions even through solid walls. Okay. Now, so what we're primarily talking about here is empathy that is simply based on sight and sound. Okay. So really, that test is not measuring whether you're an empath. It's measuring whether you are empathetic, or how empathetic you are. Your emotional intelligence, right? So being empathetic does not mean you're an empath, that you can sense emotions like radio waves. I think it's kind of funny too, because real psychic abilities are inferential skills. They're not like radio waves beaming in and out of your head necessarily. Okay. I'm not saying that's not possible. Okay. But uh, it's more like the ability to use external cues, like looking at somebody's car, its condition, and then being able to infer how that person, what their outlook on life is. You can't just detect that through radio waves coming out of their head, right? You basically can see it manifesting around them, and then using your empathy, it begins to come to you. Okay. Anyway, so remember, an empath is somebody with the psychic ability in a sci-fi novel, right? And somebody who's empathetic is more, that's more realistic, to basically say that you have, if you're especially sensitive to people's emotions, um, saying that you're an empath is, I think it seems to be an attempt to say, I'm psychic, I have special powers, right? Well, maybe you do, I don't know. And one final note, okay, remember that the primary task when you conjure demons, um, is to, there's two things. Um, Most likely you're going to make friends with them, friends. Um, I have demon friends. Um, because you're going to sympathize with them and say, oh, I can see how you evolved to be as you are and why you want me to do this. Now I understand. And then you have a decision, like, am I going to go ahead and do it, or am I just going to say no, right? And um, the nice thing is, as you do that, these entities become more refined, and they serve you better. They don't crop up in the wrong place and take you over. They basically say, hey, this looks dangerous, should we do something? And you're like, oh, thank you for sharing. And you're very friendly terms now with this impulse that's arising, right? You're on very friendly terms. This is what we call a familiar spirit. But ultimately, in the end, the goal is for both the demon and for you, whoever you are, to dissolve. Okay. So if the demon dissolves, so do you. Takes two to tango. Okay. So if you have difficulty with the idea of yourself dissolving, then it's going to be difficult for you to let go of demons, because eventually many of them, even after being your friends for a long time, will just fade out of existence and never bother you again. That's possible. But that's only if you have been able to dissolve, okay? Because that demon out there can't really exist unless something is arising as you to confront it. And neither of these entities is real. Okay. In fact, you yourself, as you confront things, you yourself are a demon. There is no you in that sense. Okay. So the ultimate demon is the ego, or the unconscious impulse reaction to a trigger. If you don't want to be triggered anymore, the entity that's being triggered needs to dissolve as well, not just the trigger. Okay. Anyway. All right. So I hope that was clear. Something tells me it was pretty clear. And I left you guys something fun to do as well, the empathy quiz. I had a lot of fun doing it. I was panicking at one point because I thought, oh, I have no empathy. So I'd like to hear how you guys do as well. All right. So until next time.